And joining us now in Washington, D.C., Stephen P. Cohen, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution and co-author of The Future of Pakistan. Stephen Cohen, it's good to have you back on the program. How are you tonight?
Good to be with you, Steve.
Pleasure. How has Pakistan, in your view, responded to the tragic incident that just took place with the 24 dead soldiers as a result of that NATO airstrike?
Well, they responded as one would expect, with indignation, anger, blaming the United States and NATO, and refusing to admit any responsibility themselves. In fact, there's a lot of theories bouncing around here, at least, and also in Pakistan, that the attack may have been provoked by either Taliban or other groups, conceivably Afghan groups, that the Americans or the NATO forces acted with bad information. The Pakistanis are taking the high road on this and getting very indignant. What concerns me the most is not simply that they cut off our access to Afghanistan via road travel. They've done that in the past, but that they've dropped out of the Bonn negotiations about the future of Pakistan, future of Afghanistan. If they are determined to push their own proxies, the Taliban, as the future government of at least part of Afghanistan, then the difference between American and Pakistani policy is real and very substantial, and it could lead to a total break between the two countries. On the other hand, I would disagree with your introduction slightly. We do get value for our money from our assistance to Pakistan. They do provide a lot of intelligence cooperation in many areas, particularly people coming in and out of Afghanistan towards Europe and towards the United States, towards Canada and other countries. So it's not an all or nothing thing.
I did want to pull one phrase out of that answer that you just gave and follow up on it, which is, do you think they do bear some of the responsibility for what happened with that NATO airstrike that seems to have gone so awry?
Well, there will be a NATO investigation, which the Pakistanis refuse to participate in, which is a bad sign in itself. And that investigation may conclude that there were other factors at play, that there were Taliban there, that the Afghan army particularly might have been involved in calling in airstrikes in the wrong time, in the wrong place. So I think we have to wait for that NATO investigation to be released before we come to any conclusions. But clearly the Pakistanis have been supporting the Taliban from their side of the border. And it could well be that this was a case where we mistook a previous Taliban position for a Pakistani position, or vice versa, and we attacked it thinking there were really Taliban there. So I think we have to withhold judgment until more of the facts are in, at least on the NATO side. But the fact that the Pakistanis pulled out of the Bonn meetings is very, very disturbing, because if it means that they are the only country in the world that supports a Taliban government for Afghanistan, or a major Taliban presence in the Afghan government, then that pits them against the United States, against Canada, against the rest of Europe, and the rest of the world, in fact, also against China.
Let me just try to understand what the implications of the, use whatever adjective you like, but relations between America and Pakistan right now are pretty terrible. What do you think the short-term security implications in Afghanistan are for that?
Well, it could be that their strategy is to hasten the American departure. One thing that all Pakistani military believe, and most Pakistani civilians also, is that most of Pakistan's problems stem from the American presence in Afghanistan. And they argue that this goes back to the days of Zia, when we used Afghanistan as a way of fighting the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and Pakistan was our proxy then. So they think that all their troubles stem from that American presence. So if you believe that, then it's natural to assume that getting rid of the Americans in Afghanistan will make Pakistan a much better country to live in. I think that's a false assumption, because their own support for extremists in Afghanistan, especially the Taliban, has created a constituency in Pakistan for extremism, and some of those extremists, the Pakistan Taliban and others, have been attacking the Pakistan state on a regular basis.
Naturally, we living in North America tend to hear about this from the Canadian and American government's perspectives, but let's say we were living in Pakistan right now and we were reading Pakistani media and watching this issue unfold on television. What would we be hearing that we're not hearing over here in terms of how they view the relationship?
Well, thanks to the internet, we can do this sitting in our living rooms or our offices and follow the Pakistani debate. It's overwhelmingly an anti-American debate. That is, the media blame the Americans for things that have gone bad in Pakistan, in this particular case for attacking the Pakistan army. And they've made the death of these Pakistani soldiers, including several officers, a national mourning event. Now, what the truth is, I'm not sure, but in this relationship, on the U.S. side and on the Pakistani side, the truth tends to get lost in the mix. There's been a lot of misinformation, disinformation on both sides. To be honest, the Americans have not always been truthful with the Pakistanis. We're playing a double or triple game in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and I think the Pakistanis deeply resent this. On their part, they've systematically lied to the United States on a whole range of issues.
Well, tell me whether you think this is part of the truth or disinformation part, because we read that Pakistan is often referred to in American circles as, quote, the epicenter of global jihadism. Do you agree with that?
I think that's hyper. I think it's an epicenter of a lot of jihadism, but a lot of it is aimed against Pakistan itself. The irony is that Pakistan is a supporter, encourager of extremist violence, terrorism, but it's also a victim of it. So Pakistan is both the perpetrator and the victim of this kind of extremist violence.
Do you think the status of the relationship...
Of course, the Pakistanis...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Of course, the Pakistanis stress the victim side of it, not the perpetrating side.
Of course. Do you think that the use of the expression Cold War accurately reflects the state of American-Pakistani relations today?
I've thought about that, and I think we're at the stage where we were with the Soviet Union in the early 1940s, where the Soviets were an ally with the United States against the Nazis, but not an ally against the Japanese. And we moved gradually to a policy of containment of Pakistan, of the Soviet Union. And several of my colleagues here and others have called for a containment strategy vis-a-vis Afghanistan, vis-a-vis Pakistan. I'm not sure if that's the right strategy at this time, but I'm waiting to be convinced that it is. But clearly there's a lot of anger and hostility here about Pakistani, what we would call duplicity, vis-a-vis their support for the Taliban. And in fact, they're fighting both sides of that war. They're helping us fight the war against the Taliban, but they're also helping the Taliban fight the war against the Americans and NATO forces in Afghanistan. So it's something like the relationship was with the Soviet Union, where they were friends against the Nazis, but then later turned to be a hostile, more assertive force in Europe as a whole.
Well, if that analogy goes further, that suggests we've got 50 years of trouble ahead of us in this relationship. Do you think that works as well?
Well, the difference, Steve, is that the Soviet Union was a pretty strong state, even though they were wrung out by World War II and the economy was devastated. They're willing to take this kind of punishment. Pakistan is a more fragile state economically and politically. The military rule, but not by popular support, and they don't know how to govern Pakistan. In the case of the Soviet Union, there was a ruthless, centralized party dictatorship that knew how to run the Soviet Union badly, but they could run it. So I think Pakistan is a weaker, more fragile state, and the prospect is that Pakistan will be the first major nuclear weapon state to break apart uncontrollably. Now, I don't think that's going to happen in the next few years, and the burden of our book, the argument of our book is this is at least 5 years away. But Pakistan is heading in that direction until it finds some way of modernizing its governance and having the military play a proper role in state affairs. It's headed towards serious trouble. In that case, then we all worry about the nuclear weapons, the 90 or 100 nuclear weapons that Pakistan now possesses.
Well, no doubt that prompts in part the reconsideration of the American-Pakistani relationship, which in your town that you find yourself in right now, we hear a lot. We hear a lot of that reaction coming from some fairly senior members of the political class, namely John McCain, the senator, former Republican presidential candidate. Do you agree that this relationship needs a major rethink right now?
I think it always did. I think it was always on a bad basis. The Pakistanis and the Americans practiced deception towards each other. Lying is perhaps too strong a word, but we really did not come clean with each other. And the Americans saw the Pakistan army as, in a sense, the trustee of the Pakistan state. That turns out not to be the proper policy. As in Egypt, we're paying the price for that now. So I think that, and of course, the Pakistanis saw the American alliance with India, the nuclear agreement with India, as proof that we were anti-Pakistani and pro-Indian when it came to making a choice in South Asia. So I think both sides have made big strategic mistakes, and I could go down. The book lists a lot of these. I go down the list, but I don't know if it's possible to reset the relationship in a normal fashion. If the Pakistanis are bent on installing a government in Kabul which is pro-Pakistani and anti-Indian and anti-American, then I think we are headed for trouble. Then I think containment strategy will kick in.
Okay, is that what you're advising right now, a containment strategy?
No, I'm not. I think it's maybe too early to do it, but we've got to see whether the Pakistanis come back to Bonn or at the negotiating table, whether they're willing to accommodate their views towards the Karzai government moderate, which I'm doubtful, I'm skeptical of that, and whether they insist on pursuing the Taliban as their proxy in Afghanistan. If that's the case, then I think we're headed for a clash. And the American option is to withdraw, to confront Pakistan, to side with India. But we're doing all of this in the case of a nuclear weapon state that has an element of failure about it, is a very risky proposition.
The Americans, of course, have been trying to have friendly relations with Pakistan, and you have, in your book, enumerated a couple of things that you think could lead to a more effective and friendlier alliance with Pakistan. Would you expound on those for us right now?
It may be too late, but I think we should have acknowledged that Pakistan was a nuclear weapon state. While we didn't like it, from their point of view, it was a legitimate weapon to acquire. So in a sense, we should have done a deal for Pakistan along the lines of the deal we did with India to legitimize their nuclear weapons program, because they're still very much afraid that we regard it as illegitimate, and therefore we try and scoop it out of Pakistan and take it away from them. I think that's technically and militarily impossible. Secondly, what we should have done, which we did not do, the Bush administration failed to do it, was to accommodate Pakistan's request after 9/11 to sell us more of their textiles and products. This was blocked by the congressional delegation from North and South Carolina. Did not want to see cheaper Pakistani goods sold in the American market. So in a sense, our domestic politics inhibited our ability to accommodate Pakistan's economic concerns.
I suspect you have seen the piece in the December issue of the Atlantic magazine, and I want to read a little excerpt of it, not just for you, obviously, but for our viewers as well who may not have seen it yet. It goes like this. Much of the world, of course, is anxious about the security of Pakistan's nuclear weapons, and for good reason. Pakistan is an unstable and violent country located at the epicenter of global jihadism, and it has been the foremost supplier of nuclear technology to such rogue states as Iran and North Korea. It is perfectly sensible to believe that Pakistan might not be the safest place on earth to warehouse 100 or more nuclear weapons. These weapons are stored on bases and in facilities spread across the country, possibly including one within several miles of Abbottabad, a city that, in addition to having hosted Osama bin Laden, is home to many partisans of the jihadist group Harakat ul-Mujahideen. Western leaders have stated that a paramount goal of their counterterrorism efforts is to keep nuclear weapons out of the hands of jihadists. I guess a bit of a long introduction leading up to the following question. How secure do you think Pakistan's nuclear arsenal is?
All we have is the word of the Pakistanis on the security of their nuclear weapons. And while I would like to believe them, I don't know what goes on behind the doors that they keep locked. So we don't really know how secure those weapons are. We do know that there have been attacks on various facilities, which may have included nuclear devices. And the attack on the Miran naval base in Karachi was an inside job. And what concerns me the most, I think, what concerns all of us who follow this issue, is there might be an inside job, some Pakistani military or officer working with some outside terrorist group, which would allow the release of nuclear weapons to a terrorist group or other group. The other contingency would be the breakup of Pakistan, in which case then the nuclear weapons are up for grab, and we're not quite sure whether they would behave responsibly as the Soviet Union did, or whether these weapons would be grabbed by various corps commanders. These are conjectural scenarios, and I wouldn't worry about them for the short term. In the meantime, of course, Pakistan uses their nuclear weapons as a political asset. And their policy is help me or else. The specter of a failing Pakistan is actually an asset for Pakistani leadership. They frighten people by their instability, and that's one of their assets. I think we have to recognize that and try to improve their governance as best we can. But in the last analysis, it's their responsibility to protect those nuclear weapons.
So again, hang in there for a bit of a longish setup to this next question, because we have the possibility, as you've pointed out, of collusion between Pakistani officials and the Taliban and al-Qaeda, and the United States continues to spend billions of dollars helping Pakistan annually in aid, and Pakistan continues to see America's friend India as a strategic threat. And you have to ask the question, I guess, at the end of all this, is Pakistan either very smart or very paranoid in the way it's acting?
It can be both at the same time, but I would point out that one of the bright spots in all of this, perhaps the only bright spot, is that India and Pakistan relations are better now than U.S.-Pakistan relations, maybe for the first time in history. They're about to sign a trade deal which is unprecedented between them. And if that continues, then clearly the risk of a major war between these two new nuclear weapon states is reduced. On the other hand, they could be normalizing their relationship with India because they feel a confrontation is coming on with the United States. And so I'm not quite sure which theory explains the normalization process, but it's a welcome sign. The United States should do as much as it can to encourage this. But in the long run, our relationship with Pakistan should be on a more objective basis. I won't say cash and carry, but clearly we should expect some things for them. In return, we should pay them or provide assistance to them, and they should make it clear that they will do those things, not simply say they will do them and not do them. That was Musharraf's policy. He agreed to full cooperation against terrorism, but in fact, there was very little cooperation when it came to the Taliban in Afghanistan. And I think we have to hold them to that commitment.
And let me just ask you one last question that admittedly is a bit off the path from this interview, but I haven't had a chance to ask it of you, and I'm curious as to your reaction here. The Americans obviously did not give Pakistani officials the heads up that they were coming after Osama bin Laden. Was that a mistake?
They didn't trust the Pakistanis, and I'm not sure whether it was a mistake or not, but there have been other cases where we did notify the Pakistanis about a raid, and the Pakistanis warned the people that were going to be attacked to get out of the area. So I think it was probably not a mistake. It embarrassed the army, and it's still not clear whether how much the army knew about Osama bin Laden's presence and about. If they did know that he was there and didn't tell us, that was bad. If they didn't know that he was there, that's also bad. So no matter how you look at it, the Pakistan army was embarrassed by the raid.
Stephen P. Cohen, we thank you very much for your help on this issue tonight. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Stephen. Good talking to you.